I frankly think people like Steve Bannon, they should not be welcome in the conservative movement anymore. They're not conservatives. They're national populists. They've embraced this anti-Semitism and things like that. And we should just say we don't want any of that and be clear of it. I want to help our side win that debate so that we can be what I hope the Republicans will stand for, what we stood for from 1940s till like 5 years ago.
Welcome back to the podcast. This is your host, Rabbi Daniel Levine. Today, it is our pleasure to invite Congressman Don Bacon. Don Bacon served for 30 years in the Air Force before going to Congress and is now serving in his 5th term as a Republican from Nebraska's 2nd District. One of the interesting things about Representative Bacon, as you will soon hear on the podcast, is while he is a Republican, he has not shied away to speak honestly about what's broken, both within his own party, to criticize many of Trump's policies, and to speak out in the strongest of terms against the what he calls populist wing of the Republican Party. We discuss wider politics writ large, what's broken in our two-party system, and then we talk about issues relevant to the Jewish community, Israel, anti-Semitism, and so forth. And then I fire a lot of miscellaneous questions at Congressman Bacon. We talk about immigration. We talk about how his evangelical faith affects how he governs and his philosophy. And we talk about the future of the Republican Party and what might happen after Donald Trump steps down as president. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, as your subscription helps me get great guests like Congressman Don Bacon. And now, without further ado, I bring you Congressman Don Bacon. Congressman, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on.
And I think you're probably the first and only person named Bacon that has ever been on a Jewish podcast. So thank you for joining here.
Hey, I get introduced in Israel as the most kosher bacon they've ever met.
I love it.
And if there's a real problem here, just think of me as being beef bacon. We'll be fine.
Amazing. Or we can, we were just talking about turkey bacon offline. So I want to start, generally in politics, and then we can sort of narrow down to anti-Semitism in Israel, which you've been sort of a steward defender on that front. But in terms of general politics, it's interesting. You've been one of the most vocal critics of Trump within the Republican Party really over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's pretty rare in politics now when everybody has just become increasingly tribal. And so talk a little bit about that. What values drive you to, again, be willing to be vocal of things like what happened in 2020, January 6th, foreign policy on Russia, all of these things?
Well, first of all, thanks for saying the last 4 or 5 years, because a lot of folks think I'm just being critical because I'm not going to run again after 5 terms. And it's not really true. I was, critical in 2020 of the election, nonsense. I supported the infrastructure bill. I supported a bipartisan investigation of January 6th, not the Nancy Pelosi one, which some guys like Steve Bannon always twist the truth on that. But I supported the bipartisan bill that required 50-50 participation and a bipartisan process for, and for subpoena people and things like that. But in the end, I'm driven by my faith. I'm an evangelical. It's more important for me to live my faith, whether it's, the golden rule, 10 commandments, and things I believe in. I love our Constitution. So I'm a patriot. In my mind, I've served my country for 3 decades in the military. So I am not defined by following one leader. I'm not, if I'm going to follow one leader, it's God, right? So I want to do what's right. And so my faith and my belief in our country defines me. And I'm an old school conservative. I believe in the traditional values that Ronald Reagan espoused and Dwight Eisenhower. I'm proud that our party was started, the first president of the Republican Party was Abraham Lincoln, my favorite president. That's what defines me, not some shirts versus skins mentality that we have out there right now, where no matter what the other guy does, he's wrong, and whatever our guy does is right. I'm not a follow the leader guy in that regard. I don't think it's right.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, Congress is meant to be a check on presidential power. I mean, what do you think, if I can push you a little bit, why do you think your view is such a minority view? I mean, your view, it's incredible that you have it, but it's almost obvious that people in Congress should be thinking about what's best for the country and voting with values and not really, really on either side, not falling into this, top-down system. So what do you think has happened really in both political parties that you don't really have this sort of individualist thinking?
Well, ever since Nixon and under the Nixon era, Congress had a lot more authority, had a lot more clout than it has today, but it slowly has dissipated. I think with each new president, where presidents do more executive orders and more, and just pushing the envelope out, and it's become more back, 40, 50 years ago, and before that even, Congress defended its authorities from the Constitution. Today, the parties tend to support the president if they're of that same party, or they oppose that president if it's from a different party, versus having more of a mindset, hey, we're going to defend Article 1 in the Constitution, particularly out of Article 1, Section 8, that lays out the authorities of Congress. And so we see this Congress losing its authorities or losing its power because it's not being defended by those elected. But again, I define myself by my faith, by my belief in the Constitution, by traditional conservative views, Milton Friedman, and the things that Reagan espoused, like all these folks that sort of defined who I was when I was in my young 20s. And I don't believe in following anybody off the cliff. And I do think a good critic can help shape policy for one's own party, but you don't do it by being quiet and just being a yes man, right? I think the tariffs are a mistake. I think we should be very supportive of Ukraine, and I would be remiss if I kept my mouth shut and didn't try to push our party a certain direction where I feel strongly.
I'm going to take us back, going to growing up, since you're talking about faith. And I want to know, and I think our viewers would be interested in learning about what was your experience like with the Jewish community, wherever you grew up in? And did your faith, did something drive you to want to learn more about the Jewish community? And I guess overarching, what about our community made you think, hey, I'm always going to support the Jewish people, and wherever I land, in the Air Force or in Congress, that you will always be supportive of us. So kind of like, where did this all love come from?
It probably started with my dad. My dad did daily devotions when I grew up. It took me to church 3 days a week, which is like 2 times more than I wanted to when I was a teenager. But so my dad was like 3 days a week for a while there. But as a young guy, he did morning devotions. And one of the things he taught me was out of Genesis 12:3. Those who bless Israel will be blessed. Those who curse Israel will be cursed. And he believed it literally. It wasn't just a figurative promise. He thought it was a literal promise. I remember during the era of Jimmy Carter, when he was negotiating with Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, he would be mad if Carter was rude to Begin, the prime minister of Israel at the time. And he would say, hey, if we do not stand behind Israel, our country will suffer for it. My dad literally believed in this promise. And I would say I do too. I believe, it doesn't mean we have to agree with every policy of the government of Israel, but we should be supportive of Israel itself and of the Jewish people. And I believe that God has that promise there. I believe that promise continues. And so and then out of that, my dad was friends with a lot of the Jewish business leaders in Kankakee County when I grew up. So I had the honor of meeting some. And it wasn't a much interaction, but that was my earliest memories. My dad, when I was 15, sent me to Israel with 15 or 16 other high school kids from Moments High School. And I got to visit Israel and see, and I love the history. First of all, I believe in the Old Testament, right? So I believe in King David, King Solomon. I believe in the prophets. I love reading out of Isaiah. I love reading Proverbs. I could go on and on. But to go to Israel and see the historical, the architecture, the archaeology, and to see the history right there that had gone on for 4,000 years, in Israel, it was a great moment. And I'll never forget going to the Holocaust Museum or the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. It's not the same as it was today. This was 1979, so it's changed a lot. But I was really moved by it because I had head knowledge of the Holocaust, but I didn't really, as a 15-year-old, did it sink into me like the mass of what happened there and what happened to the Jewish community in Europe. And so I was really emotionally, hit by doing this Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. But I'll never forget going to the Knesset afterwards. And I don't remember who this guy was, but some guy was speaking to our group. And he says, we have this government here today to ensure what happened in 1940s and 30s will never happen again. And I just felt such a passion. Yes, I am right. I'm totally there with you. right? We're going to make sure this never happens again. So also on this trip, we had a kid from Pittsburgh. He was a young Jewish guy, my same age, 15 years old, Jewish American. And he was put in our group from Moments High School. And there was a guy in my group that bullied him, mainly because of his Jewish background. So this is my first experience too, seeing anti-Semitism up close and personal. I couldn't figure out why would this, he wasn't really a friend of mine, but I knew him in my high school. Why is he being abusive to Eric, who is this kid from Pittsburgh? And so I intervened, and we had a couple little fist fights on this trip with me wanting to help defend Eric, this Jewish American boy from Pittsburgh. And I learned then, don't be a bystander, stand up, and you can't pretend there's something going on. You can't wish it away. You got to see reality and stand up for it. And so those are some of my formative experiences in my teenage years. And I started with my dad's teachings when I was, even before my teens. So I would also just point out, I got to be a colonel in the U.S. Air Force at Ramstein when we stood up missile defense for long-range missile defense for Israel. They had the Arrow missile, but they needed a good radar. The Israelis did. And they needed our infrared satellites to help synchronize all these, to help shoot down Iranian missiles if it ever came to that. So I did that in 2009 and 10. And we were always thinking that the Israelis are going to use it, but they never really did until last year. And last year, of course, they've made the system better since 2009 and 10, but it had a 99% PK kill rate on these Iranian missiles. So proud of that. But that's another chapter of my life of working with Israel, was doing this missile defense. And I'm so proud of the work that our team did with the Israeli Defense Forces. And the fact that it shot down 99% of the missiles, I was just so proud of the work. It's a good legacy for all of us who served on that weapon system.
I mean, so starting from, kind of on that vein, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, really until, 2000s, the relationship between America and Israel, both militarily and governmentally, and, I'm in California, so even, agriculture and, water has been, ironclad and really, tied at the roots. And in the last couple of years, we've seen fraying, mostly on the left, but now even a little bit on the right. What do you think is to blame for that? Is this social media? Is this Iranian or Russian propaganda? Or how would you explain this big shift? Because the fundamental liberal democratic values of both America and Israel hasn't changed. Obviously the shared history of, Judeo-Christian Bible, that history hasn't changed. So what would you, what's to blame for this?
I think a lot of it's just the loss of spiritual roots. A lot of people claim they're Christian, but I don't think they've ever opened up the Bible and read it. And I think if you're a truly believer in Bible and a true Christian, there is no room for hate. There is no room for anti-Semitism, period. And I think that God's promises still exist for Israel. And so if you're a true Christian, you believe that. And so I think a lot of folks who are now espousing anti-Semitic views and quote how AIPAC's running our country and you name it, all the stuff that you hear out there. These folks, I don't think ever cracked open a Bible in their life. They could claim they can put the cloak of Christianity around them, but it's fake. And I would say that for the most part. I think some people are misled. If they've been listening to Tucker Carlson, who was, I would say, was a fairly normal guy 6-7 years ago, but he's gone off the deep end and now he's espousing how the Israelis or Jewish people are running our country and all this hate that's coming out. And he's given Nick Fuentes, a platform. And then you look at Steve Bannon, who's right there with him. These guys are aligned with the far right, but they're not conservatives anymore. There's a difference between being a conservative and being a far right person, in my view. And these guys are now calling themselves national populists. They're not conservatives. But if you've been aligned and used to admire what they have to say, and now they're espousing these anti-Semitic views, I think that can pull some people that maybe would be well-intended, but they're being misguided. But in the end, if you pull all the veneer off and all the layers of hate, anti-Semitism is satanic, it's evil, and it just got to get, if you want to get to the nub of it, that's what it is. And I don't have any problem calling it out for what it is. Now, I think interesting enough, and I'm a big history guy, Harry Truman and the Democrats were originally the biggest supporters of Israel. The Republicans were a little leery or standoffish. They were like, how's this going to work with Egypt and Jordan? And so there was a little bit of that was probably maybe too pragmatic, maybe on the Republican side. It was the Democrats who led the way, but it started changing in 1967 when Israel had that totally dominant victory against Egypt and Syria, for that matter. And then maybe even more in 1973 when Nixon brought in massive amounts of weapons after that where Israel had to replenish what they lost. And I think ever since then, you see Republicans becoming more and more and more pro-Israel and defenders against anti-Semitism. And I think a lot of it is to do with the evangelicals. I would say some Catholics as well, but folks who believe the Bible literally, that those who bless Israel will be blessed. And in recent years, we're seeing some of the Democrats fall away from it, from the college campuses, what we see in in New York, some of the beatings of the Orthodox Jewish population. And unfortunately, though, I think we hit a tipping point where the Democrats are in a real crisis here on where they stand on this. To me, it's heartbreaking. And I'm a Republican, but I don't want this to be a partisan thing. It should be a bipartisan thing that we support Israel and that we oppose anti-Semitism. I'd rather Republicans and Democrats stand together on this. But now we're starting to see some Republicans too. And I don't want to mention some of the elected leaders, but we all know who they are. And I try to be polite before bashing fellow congressmen, but we have a few that are totally misguided on this and they're wrong. And I think it starts again with Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, and people like that.
I mean, even just your willingness to call out people that are presumably on your own side. I mean, I have a theory and I want to run it by you, and I'm curious what you think of this. I've stopped seeing politics in America as Republican, Democrat, or right versus left, but of people who believe in the tenets of capital L liberalism and people who don't. And I think on both sides, you have people that are in favor of free speech and free press. And, okay, yes, they disagree about immigration and taxes and all those things, but those are contained within sort of normative bounds of, the Constitution and liberal democracy. And then on both sides, you have where that quickly falls off, and you have sort of the alt-right or far right, and you have the far left. And these are people who don't want to just, make small tweaks to our country or argue within the bounds. These are people who actually want to tear down the foundations of our country and radically change it. I'm curious what you think of that in terms of the right-left divide.
Well, it used to be synonymous. If you were conservative, you were considered on the right. If you're liberal, you were considered on the left. But we got to be candid today. The far right is not into the traditional liberal conservatism. I'll use use that phrase. They're opposed to it. They're not conservatives, right? They're far right. And you could make that case too with some of the folks on the far left. They're not traditional liberals or political liberals that we would call them today. And that's just a fact. And I think we got to be quick to call that out and make that distinction clear. I frankly think people like Steve Bannon, they should not be welcome in the conservative movement anymore. They're not conservatives. They're national populists. They've embraced this anti-Semitism and things like that. And we should just say we don't want any of that and be clear of it. So I don't know if I'm getting to your question, but they're the left and the right are not synonymous with liberals and conservatives anymore. And I would say I was a little alarmed when the vice president said that liberal conservatism is in the past. Now, liberal conservatism is Ronald Reagan. And I do not embrace the populism. What is populism? It doesn't have a moral compass. It's it's following the passions of the people. I want to be guided by a moral compass, what's right and wrong. It starts with the 10 Commandments, the Golden Rule, the fruits of the Spirit that we read about. That's the compass we should be going by, not the passions of the people.
How would you define this difference between, on the right, conservatism versus populism? Like, how can somebody tell?
Well, traditional conservatives, we believe in peace through strength. We believe in being advocates for democracy and freedom. Doesn't mean we have to be in every war. Shouldn't have to be. But we should help out the side of freedom, whether and whatever makes sense in that scenario. But we can't be isolationists. We learned in the 1930s isolationism did not work. I also find traditional conservatives believe in the free market. They want to defend it. They believe in free trade, though it should be fair trade. Ronald Reagan believed in free trade, though he thought, hey, if we're being treated unfairly, you got to respond. We believe in federalism, where we do what Article 1, Section 8 says, but the rest of this goes to the states. local governments. And so the federal mission is very well defined, and beyond that should be a state or local authorities. We believe in defending the innocent amongst us. We also believe in accountability for those who are guilty of crime. And so if you're a murderer, we believe you should pay the price for it. But if you're an innocent preborn, we believe we should defend you. Those are basic conservative values that Ronald Reagan would have believed in, every single one of them. And I have not changed. Now the populists are getting away from that. That's why they're supporting tariffs. That's why they support the government buying 20% share of some company's stock, or they're believing price controls now. These are not conservative values. They're not defenders of Ukraine when Russia does the invasion. They become isolationists pretty much, and we're increasingly seeing more and more of them not standing there with our friend Israel. I would say the populist movement's divided on that right now, but I see those cracks in the populist movement when it comes to Israel. Conservatives have no problem. We stand by Israel. We stand by our Jewish American friends, and there's zero qualms about that. It's 100%. That's how we feel, and it's an easy decision when it comes to policy where I stand on that.
So that actually is a perfect leadway into my next question. You've been in Congress before October 7th, and now obviously we've had the time after October 7th. There's been numerous bills in your tenure about all the ways that America and Israel solidify their friendship and their partnership, right? Both economic, via trade. We got security agreements. We helped Israel really with the Iron Dome, which you voted for it, which was a lifesaver, as you mentioned about the Iranian attacks and pretty much any missiles from Hamas. The Iron Dome saved lives. And so we have all this legislation. And so I'm curious, and you can either divide this between pre-October 7th or after, or just all in one. What is your experience working with both your side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle, the Democrats, on bipartisanship when it comes to supporting Israel? Did you find it easy? Was there any obstacles? How did it look like for you?
Well, up until now, it's been very bipartisan supporting Israel. I do see in the last 6 months where there's more and more Democrats that are in opposition. And we have a Republican from Georgia who's had bills that to defund all of our money that going to Israel. So we got a couple of Republicans too there, but the vast majority of Republicans, 95%, I would say, are very pro-Israel. And I would think you're about 50-50 on the Democrat side, though I hope now that we have more peace in Gaza, that we'll see those numbers on the Democrat side go back up, and I hope get back to somewhat normal there. But it's been up until the last 6 months, it's been very bipartisan. And I try to remind folks, yeah, we send a lot of weapons and military aid to Israel, but those weapons are built here. So it has a positive economic impact on our defense industry. Two, Israel has a knack for taking our weapons and making them better. And so they've done that in multiple cases. And then they come back to us and say, hey, this is how we improved your weapon. So then we get an improved weapon back. So the Israelis have made our military industry better through the iterative back and forth of our trade and learning back from them. And, Israel's high tech in their own right. So we were able to use some of their technology to improve our weapons. One area that people don't realize is the amount of value we get from Israeli intelligence. U.S. is really good at satellite stuff and signals intelligence. The Israelis are second to none when it comes to human intelligence in the Middle East, and we all benefit from that. And so we gain a lot of value from the intelligence relationship we have with Israel. So that's just some of the thoughts that I have on it. Also, I'll just point out, Israel's made tough decisions that have benefited our national security environment here that we were unwilling to take. Examples: when Israel attacked the nuclear plant in Iraq, and when they attacked the nuclear plant in Syria, these are things that we would have needed to have done, and maybe we didn't realize it at the time when Israel did it, but subsequently we said, thank you, Israel, that we really needed you to have done that, and you did a great job. My point being is Israel's made some choices that benefited America that we weren't willing to do for various, reasons out there. So we have a win-win relationship with Israel, and we should protect it.
I want to say I'm impressed at your standing by the bipartisan nature. I mean, I totally agree with you for the good of Israel and America. I think, we obviously need Israel to be a bipartisan issue. What's been interesting is that it seems like many Republicans, and I totally get why they want to do this, but have sort of almost weaponized this as we are the pro-Israel party. Democrats have completely turned their back. And so, I do really appreciate that nuance. I know Adam has a question about a little bit of, looking forward in the region.
Where do you see America's relationship with Israel now that post October 7th, everything has fundamentally changed, right? For Israel, for the Palestinians, and now we have a potential new government if the Arab states, as part of that peace agreement, put in a technocratic government. That's going to change America's role in trying to facilitate potential diplomacy, negotiations, and also the countries that are also part of getting the sides to talk together. So where do you see maybe the short term and then like the next 1, 2, 5, 10 years?
Well, Israel has done great work, whether it was Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, Yemen, and America has helped. But we got to be candid. Israel has done the lion's share of the hard work here. And so I think we're in a different situation where Iran has been weakened significantly. Hezbollah has been tremendously weakened. I mean, they're still there. There's remnants there, but most of them, if they're alive and still functioning, they're missing their right hand or a chunk of their leg right now. So Hezbollah is greatly weakened. Hamas is tremendously weakened. So we got an opportunity to rebuild and help Israel, replenish here, and let's deepen our relationship, whether it's the military agreements that we have and weapons that we're working on. Because I think in the end, what we have is maybe a short-term opportunity to replenish and re-gauge our gyros a little bit. But Iran's not done yet. They've been weakened, and they're going to come back. And so what we've been doing the last year or two, this will be, I think, relevant again 2 or 3, 4, 5 years from now, because unless we get a regime change in Iran, there's always going to be a threat to Israel from there. And yeah, they're weakened today, but they'll rebound over time.
Do you get a sense when talking to other members of Congress, not in public, but sort of, behind closed doors or in the hallways, that a lot of people, especially on the Democrat side, are more pro-Israel than they're willing to say publicly? I mean, I was just looking at the guy in Massachusetts, Seth Moulton, who just announced a couple of days ago, he was not taking any money from AIPAC, as if it's like the worst thing ever when, from a numbers wise, AIPAC money is, nowhere near as much as other lobbyist groups. So, I mean, what do you get the sense of sort of the public persona of people's statements and what they actually believe and privately?
I get attacked all the time because AIPAC has supported me, and not just the organization, but individual members all over the country have helped me out. And I just tell people they're Americans. They have a right to support who they want. And I ran on being pro-Israel, and I won in a district that the top of the ticket, my party lost twice, right? So I do what I campaign on. I've campaigned on being pro-Israel, and I've done it. I've done what I said I was going to do. I have no apologies. And yes, pro-Israel Americans have supported my campaign. I just think we got to don't apologize about it. Farmers have a right to support who they want. Carpenters do. People that are, libertarian have the chance to support who they believe in. And my point is, we're all allowed to affiliate and align ourselves with who we want in our country. And our government gives us freedom of speech and freedom to support who we want to support financially, and financial support is equivalent to freedom of speech. Frankly, that's how the Supreme Court has linked them together. And so I get poked all the time on social media about being a supporter of AIPAC or AIPAC supporter me, and I don't care. I say, these are all Americans, and I've served in Israel, doing missile defense, and I believe in supporting the only democracy in that region. And I point out the intelligence value and all the other things we get, and it's a win-win relationship. And so I take no grief from folks who want to poke, and I sort of enjoy giving it back to them.
I love that. I teach in the political science department at UC Irvine, and this morning I put a poll on social media. I said I'm going to be talking to you and what questions. So, here's some tough questions from current college students that I'm sure they would love to hear your thoughts on. Not a lot of people, especially on a liberal campus in California, have much interaction with the evangelical community, and usually it's kind of spoken about as this, vague boogeyman that's, anti-abortion and anti-LGBTQ, and a lot of people don't really understand. I guess I'll ask this in the hard-hitting way from the student perspective. How do you ensure that your personal faith beliefs don't end up influencing what should be much more of a universalist, religious, political disposition? In other words, what is that relationship, given that obviously you're a person of faith?
Well, everybody's guided by their faith. Even if you're an atheist, it guides some of your principles, right? So we all have. If you're a person of faith, you believe there's really an almighty God, it's going to have an impact on some policy. Not every policy you can align with what's the biblical view of this policy, that policy, but some of them, maybe a little more clearly than others. But I also realize that we live in a country that has freedom of religion, and people have a right to believe in what they want. And so therefore, there is a line in there of, hey, what I do in my personal life, I shouldn't have to mandate it for everybody else. And so I do believe there's a personal life that God's called me to live a certain way, but that you may disagree with that, and I shouldn't compel you to have to live your faith, my faith, in your own life. So I get that. So and I believe in not having an established religion in our country. People have a right to go to the church or the synagogue that they want, and I embrace that. Freedom of religion is very precious. We learned that the hard way, when over the 1600s, 1700s, people didn't have that right, and you had to follow. We saw those people being murdered in Europe. If you weren't Catholic, you were getting murdered. If you weren't Protestant, you were getting murdered. And if you were Jewish, you were being persecuted, right? Well, we've learned in our country to defend freedom of religion, and I embrace that. But that said, there's some values there that are going to come through, whether it's on the pro-life side. I even think what I really enjoy is a lot of folks who don't have a faith value who are pro-life, because there's some just common sense. There's a beating heart. And so you don't have to even be faith-based to know there's a beating heart. There's two legs, two arms, even with a very young unborn child. So, but anyway, I also believe that we've had a lot of debates on the gay marriage thing. In the end, the Supreme Court ruled on this, and I can have my own personal views, but somebody else, my neighbor, may have a different view. And in our country, you're allowed to have a difference, and you're right, and you're allowed to pursue happiness right out of our Declaration of Independence. And we don't have to all be aligned. That's all right. There's something to be said about having a diverse country. I'm trying to think there's a better word for it. But it's all right that you and I don't have to share all the same views, and we can still be neighbors. That's part of what America's about.
So you brought up freedom of speech, and there's one bill making its way through Congress. You're a co-sponsor to it. It's the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which I'm sure you know that passed the House last session. It did not advance in the Senate, so the bill was reintroduced by Congressman Lawler, who has just been in it. We interviewed last week, a great advocate also for the Jewish community and for Israel. So one of the things that happened this year, making its way through its committee, was that the hearing was postponed because of concerns over freedom of speech. That when Title VI schools, when they take the funding and they have to ensure now that Jewish students are protected against discrimination, which is the core of the bill, if and when it gets passed, they'll lose their Title VI funding. But one of the main criticisms, I think, and we hear it from both sides, is that it stifles freedom of speech. And so, can you explain to our viewers how the bill is not infringement of freedom of speech, and that it actually draws a line between speech that is acceptable both in the university setting and probably within their each student code of conduct, and then what crossed the line in which the students have to, or the university has to investigate because it is an act of anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, I think this bill does a good job defining anti-Semitism. And some of my colleagues on my side of the aisle take umbrage at it because they're saying it's like anti-Bible, which is just untrue, right? It's hearing Matt Gaetz and others try to defend that, hey, we're going to defend the Bible by defending anti-Semitism. It's just not true. I think Christians who actually read the Bible know that anti-Semitism is evil, period. So that's these folks are, I don't know, they're putting up a bogey position and trying to defend anti-Semitism. I just don't like it. So I want to say it up front, at least this bill defines anti-Semitism, more traditional definition. It goes back to Donald Trump's original definition in his first administration, which people don't realize. Secondly, people have a right to share hate. You got a right, if you want to be a hateful person, you can go on the street corner, you can put hate, you can email it, you can, whatever you want to do, as long as you're not committing violence, you got the right to do it. But I also have the right to not like it. I have the right to stand up against it. And you don't necessarily have a right to stand on a college campus espousing hate. College campuses have the right to regulate free speech on their campus, and they have a right to protect Jewish American students from being accosted and abused. And we're seeing it some of the places like in New York City and some of these other campuses, they were not protecting the Jewish American students. I have heartburn with that. They should have been doing more to, I mean, it's not that, like when I was listening to Omar, she was like, well, are these Jewish American students, are they pro-genocide? That's just so wrong. These are Americans. They have nothing to do with the Knesset or Prime Minister Netanyahu. They're from Chicago. They're from Omaha. They're from, Oklahoma, wherever they're from. They're Americans. And they want to go to school and not be accosted or abused. And so I would also point out, you don't have a right to espouse hate on X or Facebook. These are privately owned applications. And they have the right, if they want, to clean up some of this talk on their social media. And so you don't have freedom of speech to espouse. You don't have a right to write hate on a newspaper. The newspaper editorial board said, no, we don't want that in our paper. That's their right, because that's their right of freedom of speech, right? For the newspaper. And so I think people have gotten overboard saying I can just espouse hate anywhere I want, to include X, Facebook, you name it. You do not. You have the right to, you can speak it. You can go on the street corner and say it. You can, if you want to be a dummy and espouse hate on a street corner in Omaha. But I have the right to stand up and say I disagree with it.
I want to just throw a couple more, student questions your way. I really love that answer. I think that was, the perfect nuance. In terms of immigration, one of the, your voting record has been, relatively conservative, but you've also pushed back on some of Trump's recent, say the $10,000 or $100,000, I don't even know what we're calling it, medallion for immigration. So talk to us a little bit about, general where you see immigration, what's maybe gone wrong in the last, 10 or so years, and what you hope happens moving forward.
Well, we all have to acknowledge that illegal immigration is bad. We were getting at sometimes 12,000 a day under Joe Biden. That was untenable. It's one of the reasons why Harris lost the election. It was so bad, and the Democrats did nothing to counter it until like 4 or 5 months before the election. It was too late, right? And we were letting in violent people, and I know the vast majority are not violent, but some were violent, whether it's gang members. And we see some of these murders of young women from people who are here illegally. Americans got mad about that. So we want a legal immigration. We want to support legal immigration, not illegal immigration. So that's a principle for me right up front. Secondly, I support more legal immigration. And without legal immigration, our country will have a declining population. And a declining population is bad for our economy. It's bad for Social Security. It's bad for Medicare. And it's, we can have more economic growth with a small increase in population year after year. And that will not happen without legal immigration. Legal immigration will give us a slight growth. And if we want to bring in high skilled workers, we need some seasonal workers. These things are helpful to us. And it's helpful to the individuals too, that someone want to make a living and send money back home to Mexico. And if that's what we need to help our farms keep going, I think that's a good thing. And I can tell you, a lot of big companies in Omaha can't find the high school workers right now that they want. They'd love to bring in somebody from India or wherever to fill that role. And these folks make great citizens. I point out when I first came in to Congress I got elected in 2016, swore the oath in 2017. The two best heart doctors in Omaha were two Indians who became, American citizens, but they came from India. The two best heart doctors. Are we better off to having these people in Omaha? Yes. They saved a lot of lives. We're better off because of them, right? Our local area was benefited from these two guys, or a guy and a lady, actually. So my point is, I want to oppose illegal immigration, but I support legal immigration, and those are my principles there. And our country benefits from it.
So sadly, you have announced that you are not running / retiring. So one, I wanted to echo Adam and, really thanking you for your almost 10 years of service. Why do you think it's so rare for people in Congress to retire? I mean, one of the things that's interesting, I'm a millennial and I talk to a lot of, Gen Z students, and people sort of have this view where people get into Congress or, obviously, Supreme Court, and people just kind of stay until, Joe Biden, similarly, far past when they obviously should step down. So what sort of went into that decision? Was it political? Was it family based? Was it?
Mhm. But a lot of people define themselves by their job title, congressman, and I do not. I have equal value for my military background, and I loved my time there. And I'm just not going to be defined by being a congressman. But a lot of people, it's their whole image of themselves and don't want to walk away from it. I wanted to walk away on top, for one. The real motivator was 2-year election cycles. I did 5 elections in 10 years, had 4 primaries in that same time. So really 9 contested elections in 10 years. And I have to raise $6.5 million every cycle or more, but $6.5 million last cycle. So I just got tired of that grind, 4 days a week in DC, 3 days back home. And 22 months out of 24 months, I'm raising money and campaigning. I wanted to do something different. My wife wanted me home more often. That was a factor, right? She wanted me to, it was a time we needed a change for both her and I, the way when it's all said and done. But I still have a burning passion for our country, for politics, for making a difference. I look forward to trying to help out presidential candidates that I like: Brian Kemp, Glenn Youngkin, Nikki Haley. These are people that I align myself with. I'd love to see them be the next uh, inhabitants of the White House. So I'm going to be involved. I'm not going to retire. I'm going to be doing something different, but just as engaged. And so that's my hope. I'd like to make an impact in our party. I want to fight for the soul of our party. I want to make sure that we elect a good conservative next for the White House.
What are you hearing inside the Republican Party? I mean, I assume, you kind of spoke of these both wings, the conservative and populist. So I assume there's going to be some big primary showdown between the two post President Trump. But I'm curious, what you've been hearing.
Well, right now there's a lot of talk. Is it going to be Vance or Rubio? I think we have, and Rubio. I voted for him in 2016, so I've always been a fan there. But there will always be a primary, and there's going to be a divide between the traditional conservative views versus the more populist views. Isolationism versus the indispensable voice for freedom. I believe in the latter, right? So there's going to be some debates on it, and I, I have no idea how that will turn out. But I know I want to be involved. I want to help. Uh, I want to help our side win that debate, so that we can be what I hope the Republicans will stand for, what we stood for from 1940s till like 5 years ago.
Amazing. Well, you've been super generous with your time. I wanted to give you the final word if there's anything you want to end on.
Well, I have a view when it comes to the current president. There's things I support. I've enjoyed the fact that we secured the border. He did a lot of that on his own. I support the fact that he's been a great supporter of Israel, helped do away with the Iranian nuclear program. So there's things that I support, and there's things I disagreed with. Tariffs, maybe Ukraine, though I think he's getting a little better on that. I don't want to be the guy that reflexively disagrees with the president on every turn or reflexively supports him at every turn. I don't think that's not having, I would say, moral clarity, right? And so I recommend for those who don't like the president or do, look at each issue and have your voice known on that issue. And that's what I've been trying to do. I don't want to be, there's some of my good friends just fight the president on everything. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the guy that totally kisses the ring either. We should be somewhere where this issue I agree with, this issue I don't agree with. And that's what I've tried to do.
Amazing. Well, Congressman Don Bacon, thank you so much.
Thank you.